Welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. I'm a psychological astrologer as well as an analytical hypnotherapist, and I am joined today by Lyn Birkbek. Hello, Lyn.
Hi there.
Well, you have written this very good book called Dynamic Interactive Astrology. So I think it would be good to begin with the title. What do you mean by dynamic interactive astrology?
The dynamic bit is because it has power to it, it generates a kind of psychological force, I suppose you could say, that works its way upon the psyche. Interactive because it's by interacting with yourself via astrological symbolism and key words that dynamic effect is created.
Yes, I like that. And indeed, when I'm when I'm actually teaching astrology, I'm very keen to provide diagrams with spider diagrams with keywords for my students, because it helps them to start making those connections.
Yeah.
So good to see that you really have that as almost a foundation in the book.
For sure.
I also felt that looking at it, what you've really got here is a workbook.
Indeed.
So that's very different, because a lot of astrology books are more like textbooks, because they're providing you with a lot of information, which is great. This is different because it is a workbook. So tell us about that aspect of it.
Well, it's the interactive bit again, really. It's by well, you just mentioned the textbook. Textbooks all very well. What they do is they just feed you information, but it kind of leaves it there. Whereas if you give people the actual fundamental energy of a planet or a sign or a house, then you can kind of mix it in with other energies, keywords, keywords, and then it starts the whole process in motion. It's based upon, we already know who we are unconsciously to varying degrees. So astrology is like a big kind of catalyst to our personality. And keywords, as the word implies, it unlocks the meaning that is locked within us simply by, well, as you've seen in the book, you build key phrases from a planet and a sign and a house position. And from that, you're then asked questions about what your key phrase says to you. So, for instance, with your sun, say, take me, for instance, my sun's in Virgo in the third house. Keyword for the sun, purpose. Keyword for Virgo, improve. Keyword for the third house, words or communication. So my purpose is to improve communication. So immediately that sets up a whole range of ideas and thoughts in my head. Also, when one of the questions is asked, it's like, if you look at your life as a kind of narrative arc, where are you on that narrative arc? That opens up a whole, in relationship to that key phrase. So that opens up a whole kind of thing, where am I in my life with that purpose? So it's unfolding the reality of one's being rather than it being a little bit abstract, which textbooks can make it.
I think what I find interesting about the way you've set it up is that, on the one hand, some people might say that this is too superficial because you're just using keywords. But what I like about it is that it can be as superficial or as deep as you dare make it.
Absolutely, yes. It's interfacing your unconscious, your psyche. And
because
so, yeah, go ahead.
The questions that you invite people to ponder on are actually very soul-searching.
Extremely. That's my own input. I'm a very soul-searching character. And so therefore, I imbue the whole way I actually have communicated astrology in my whole career, which is 40 years now. And all the time I have that, well, as you are an astrologer, you understand what Pluto in the first house is about. So Pluto is power of the persona. And I have that kind of powerful persona which penetrates the keyword for Pluto, and it's in Leo, and therefore shows a powerful showing of my personality just by being. I can't help it. And so, as I said, it imbues my work, all my written works, with that kind of Plutonian penetrative energy.
I think what I also like is that this book could fit in very easily also alongside other books too. So it's whatever you're doing with your astrology, this book comes in and is prompting you to go and do the work and to go and play with different ideas and different concepts based on your chart.
Yeah.
And I think that's very valuable because it's empowering. It's very self-empowering, which is something that I'm very keen on. But also it adds then to a person's practice, because the thing about astrology, as I tell my students continually, is that you will learn it as fast as you engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're engaging and you're practicing, it becomes like your first language almost, or it becomes your first language because it's the reference point through which you see the world. So I like this. I like the fact that you're saying to people, okay, here are the key words, but exactly what do they mean to you?
Exactly. I always throw it back into the user's court rather than it's like, astrologer, tell me what I'm like. I'm saying you already know what you like. All you need is a few key words to unlock what you like. And then when you unlock it yourself, then it takes on a whole different profile, really. It's more like a skeleton key then. You can unlock all sorts of doors because astrology is powerful. Well, in the hands of certain astrologers, it's powerful. Often astrology can be bland, even, funnily enough, because it can reduce things to a kind of like you're just that kind of personality type. Whereas a personality is only, as the word means, that which is making a noise.
Yeah, yeah. So what is it that drives you as an astrologer?
I like your questions. Well, I think mainly because there's a secret to life, which most of the world, most of humanity is nowhere near getting. And that secret has something to do with power and love and intelligence. And so to increase the power and the intelligence and the love is what astrology is capable of doing. Astrology, I always think, is ruled by Uranus, which is the planet of truth. So astrology is truth revealing. And so it can be quite upsetting to some people because it does. I did an interview, no names mentioned, recently with a woman who was writing an article on me. And she had enormous defenses. And I kind of piled my Pluto in the first house in. It was quite formidable, her resistance. But I got through eventually because what was there was there. I was sending out a message to that part of her which she kept hidden. And so I'm relying upon a psychic function to do that. And astrology is as you said earlier, is the language of that power.
Can you expand on the psychic power?
Expand on psychic power. Okay. I love your questions. They're very probing yourself. I like to know what your Pluto's up to. Sorry?
It's in the first house.
There you go. See, well, there's a good example. Psychic power. It's just saying, there it is. You know, what else? What proof do you want other than synchronicity? All right. It's synchronicity is life agreeing or not agreeing with the self. And astrology is, you could describe it also as a study of synchronicity. So it's the algebra of synchronicity.
So coming back to your meaning of psychic power, do you feel that beyond the reading of the language of the chart, that you are also engaging, let's say, with a person's own energy field and interacting on that level as well, at an energy level?
For sure, yeah. The whole thing about fields is very interesting, because I was reading the other day this paper that someone written, that it isn't a case of things in life, it's a case of fields. And fields set something off, they create something. So when you enter a person's field or fields, you're interacting, there's that word again, with their energy. And as you know, with Pluto in the first house, people like you and I, we see life as energy. We don't see it as, it's very quantum. We don't see it as a fixed objects or people. It's all in motion, isn't it? And I remember a thing that really kind of, what's the word I want? Cryptic thing. One astrologer, a famous astrologer, you've heard of Dane Rudyard, I take it.
Yes.
And he said, events don't happen to us, we happen to events. Well, as I said, it's pretty cryptic on the face of it, but I take that to mean that the event, which could be written in astrological language, like say, I got Pluto squaring my moon presently, I love it, you know. So that is the event in potential. Me, I happen to that event. All right, with what I am now in this on my own timeline. So I interact with that transit, Pluto in the sky squaring my moon in my chart. And so it's not happening to me, I'm happening to it. And that's a very provocative idea, because it means that you are, the very way you think and feel is influencing what's happening to you. I
like that. It's like you're stumbling onto something. And as yes. you go onto it, you set something off. And what are you going to do as you set that off? What are your options for the way in which you're going to deal with what has been set off? I think that that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And indeed, it makes me think of courses that I've been running recently called Working with the Gods, which are precisely about what do we do with planetary energy? How do we engage with it? So that rather than feeling that we are being besieged, that we are in fact engaging with it in a positive way, so that we can perhaps transmute energy that might feel very negative or destructive and turn it into something much more creative and powerful.
Yeah, that's right. It's like Pluto, especially his influence, is like saying, this might hurt, but I'm doing it for your own good. You know? But you've got to believe that. And that takes us into another thing. Well, what do you believe? What kind of belief profile do you have? What kind of faith profile do you have? So we go to Jupiter. Let me do a key phrase for Jupiter, and we take it from there. Because it's very important, faith, isn't it?
Faith is everything, because without it, there is very little reason to have hope.
Exactly.
Hope, you only have despair. Forget fear, it's despair. And that is a very dangerous situation for the psyche to be in. I think maybe the reason why it was considered to be one of the despair was considered to be one of the 7 deadly sins. Why would that be? That would be because you had lost your faith, and in the process of losing that, you've disconnected from hope, and you are now in the process of self-destruction. So I think you're quite right. Faith is important. The therapist side of me works very hard to help people rebuild faith, because faith is another word for trust. So it's just that it's not just about trusting individuals, it's about trusting in the process of life. And that is huge.
Intimidatingly so.
Sorry?
Intimidatingly so.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But you see, it's great because both you and I and Pluto in the first house, we're talking through that channel in many respects, which some people might go, what the hell are they talking about? Which is just the way it is, I suppose. But it raises a question of holding of identity anyway. What is it? And why do I have this particular personality, this particular birth chart? You know, where does it come from?
Well, where does it come from? That is a whole other discussion. But let's hear what you think about it. Where does it come from, in your view?
The short answer is God.
Ah.
Or gods, if you like, and goddesses or deities is a good neutral word, which are, well, in Jungian terms, they're archetypal powers. And so we are like playthings of the gods in a way. And the thing about me is, I have to say this, that I'm as much poet as I am astrologer. To me, poetry is the best thing because it speaks for itself, quite literally, right? And so, whereas with astrology still leans a bit too much into about something rather than actually being it. Do you follow what I'm saying by that?
I do. I'm not entirely sure that I would go along with that. I think astrology for me is poetic, and it's poetic because it is full of story. And that story is our story, because that's what archetypes are. It's the story of humankind and our experience of the world in its complete and utter complexity, and the myriads of different combinations that it expresses itself. And so I think that when I look at astrology in that way, then I can say that we know it is a mirror for humanity itself.
For sure.
And that is my definition, I guess, of poetry and music and everything, because it's life. And as we are here, these souls that are in this world, that's extraordinary. And that's the power of astrology.
Yeah, let me get it right, get this right. When I say that astrology tends to talk about what things are about, whereas poetry is it. I bring to mind one of my poems well, I did a whole lot of planetary poems. The Pluto one begins, don't ask me to recite the whole thing, I wouldn't anyway, because my memory couldn't take it. But the first verse goes, power of seed and fate of soul, deep in bowels of womb and soul, death and darkness, soundless slime, humus, mucus, marl and lime, feed my dream of birth to come.
Well, very good. I remembered any of it.
You're well in there.
That we had no idea you were going to be reciting poetry.
Well, I'm definitely not the unexpected. I'm nothing. I have Sun exactly square to Uranus, so I don't know where I'm coming from a lot of the time.
Well, obviously I love that, and what I think for me also, just that imagery could indeed also be a stepping stone onto perhaps imagining and engaging with that Pluto energy. So that I think is a very, quite apart from being very descriptive, it's also very useful.
Yes, and the thing is that, well, this is a kind of very kind of an objective problem with astrology, is that a lot of people don't think it's rubbish, you know, which is rather disadvantageous to our whole mission, you might say. This is why art is so important to me, because it's with art you convey what the astrological planets will convey to me. So I take it from what it conveys to me and put it in my own words as a poet. Whereas, and so reach people who would not otherwise have been receptive to that planetary law. So I'm covering, well, not all the bases, covering the two main bases, which is kind of left and right brain. You know, it's because it boils down to that Sun in Virgo in the third house, you know, purpose to improve communication. That's, yeah, I can communicate astrology better if I don't use astrology. And other paradoxes.
Actually, it's made me laugh, you talking about, you know, the fact that it is so still widely dismissed. Because it's suddenly the question comes into my mind, what on earth possesses any of us to pursue something that is so widely dismissed by?
That's very good. I like that. I like that. Absolutely.
Not to be something very bloody-minded about us as astrologers that say, yeah, actually, do you know what? We're still going to go our own way.
Well, it's a Uranus factor again, because as I said earlier on, Uranus rules astrology, and Uranus is the outsider. I mean, it's the only planet in the solar system that goes around on its side, and not a lot of people know that, but it is. You know, so it's the outsider. It's the odd one out. It's the autist. You know, it's bloody-minded. It's daft, but that's the magic of Uranus. It's the magic of aligning yourself with something which is, well, put it this way, the truth, as I think some Eastern sage said, the truth, strictly speaking, is paradoxical. What the world thinks of as a truth is probably not. You turn it on its head. Well, that's what somebody else said about paradox. Was it Oscar Wilde? The paradox is the truth standing on its head to attract attention. And so we're dealing with paradox, we're dealing with truth. And it's not easy.
We are, and I think actually what is interesting in terms of, I guess, the position between individuals and the dominant view or culture is that very often there is a mismatch between the two.
Yeah.
It's just that some people, and thankfully there's a good many of us, actually say it out loud. So I was reading recently how more people will admit to having had psychic experiences than anyone would guess.
Yes.
Because they tend to not want to say it. And in fact, it seems that in the last 2 generations, there's been an increase of people reporting having psychic experiences. And why would that be, given that the materialist paradigm and view of the world has such a stronghold on education, has a stronghold on the media. It's got worse actually in the last 20 or so years, where it's become extremely aggressive towards anything that is unscientific, which is only dealing with one model or one view of science. So it's become extremely aggressive. And despite that, more people are admitting to having psychic experiences. So I think what we're witnessing is perhaps confusion amongst a lot of people, because what they are experiencing is saying one thing, and what authorities are saying is something else. And they're going to have to choose which way they'll navigate. So they're quietly navigating and asking questions that they dare not do in a more public way. But certainly you as an astrologer, I as an astrologer and a hypnotherapist, hear people asking those questions all the time,
Yeah.
but not wanting to do it with their friends, with their family, etc., because they're afraid that they're going to be misunderstood or called mad or dismissed or whatever way it is. So it's a very interesting dilemma, whereas in other cultures still, and in previous generations, centuries back, we didn't have this dilemma, because there was an openness to that which was, let's say, more mystical or intangible.
Yeah, it's Isaac Newton who's got a lot to answer for. I mean, because he opened up the whole kind of mechanical, rational, scientific paradigm. But interestingly, he believed in astrology and things like that. And I always have this little tale, whether it's apocryphal or not, doesn't matter, because it still works. When his colleagues were accusing him of being fanciful in believing in astrology, he says, I believe in it because I studied it. You don't because you haven't.
Well, that's about the answer that I still use.
Say again?
It still works centuries later, because I have been known to say exactly that.
Yeah. So he was a wise man after all. So, yeah, exactly. What's your birth sign?
I'm a Taurus.
You're a Taurus, yeah. So nice and steady there.
So if we're looking at astrology through the lens of your book, for instance, and I'm a psychological astrologer, what your book is showing is that one of the most beneficial uses for astrology, of course, is the mirror, the know thyself.
For sure. Number one. And the Delphic Oracle got it right.
Yeah, absolutely. We're back to the Delphic Oracle. So it looks like we're back in ancient times yet again.
Well, that's it. And that's the kind of cosmic thing where, without getting kind of conspiracy theorists much, the whole thing about what I used to call about 50 years ago, I called the intellectual tyranny. And it was put in place a few hundred years ago, really, by Newton and the likes of him. And I asked myself, well, astrologically, the planet which rules that kind of thing is Saturn. And Saturn, so to understand Saturn is important, because then you understand the material or materialistic paradigm far better. It's the whole fallen angel bit. He's pissed off because no one believes him anymore. So he's doing it with a vengeance. He's really piling on this particular limited and self-limiting model of life, of reality. So to look at a person's Saturn, I find is the next stop on from the sun and the moon and the ascendant, because Saturn is a great teacher, as we know. Saturn is saying, it's saying, what are you learning in this lifetime? And to know you're learning something means that you don't necessarily aren't very good at it yet. So don't get complex about not knowing something, because Saturn tends to provide one with an inferiority complex. I mean, it's not really, it's just saying, well, you're learning something. So obviously you're not going to be that great at it first, are you? So I mean, my Saturn's in Cancer. So I'm learning to feel, okay? And so that sounds kind of a bit terse, but it's true. And I've been doing it for quite a while now, and I'm far better at feeling than I used to be. And also because I've done it consciously and objectively. I'm good at helping others to feel. I had a client just the other day who's how she felt about that life and everything was totally buried in her. She was from Russia, actually, in that kind of Russian conditioning of the mind to keep you in the dark. And so she was, a chart was saying, you're learning to get out from under that paradigm, you know. And so, yeah, Pluto, Saturn's very good for beginning to, at least, to kind of deconstruct the part of you that's been badly put together by the state.
It's interesting because you were talking about the tyranny of the intellect. I'm rephrasing slightly what you said, but I'm taking it to a personal context. So the tyranny of the intellect. Well, so much of the dysfunction that we experience as human beings is the disconnection from feeling. So of course, this is the Saturn role there, which is all about being practical, being real, not being fanciful, just being very goal-oriented, being very focused. So it's good for some things, but when it comes to this kind of thing, Saturn is not your go-to planet. It's really not, because that's not his area of expertise. So interesting. However, when you were talking about their Saturn in Cancer, here's where Saturn is going, oh, really? Is there more to life than this?
Precisely. And it's in the 12th house as well.
Ah, is there more to life than this? So of course there is more to life than this. Oh, well, in that case, I'm going to learn about it and really practice it. And so then he sort of channels the energy in that direction.
Yeah, and see, I think it was my second book called Relationship Astrology. I realized that Saturn had two faces, rather like the other god, Janus. And so I realized that the two faces of Saturn is one that's looking inwards, and the other face is looking outwards. The conventional, accepted version of Saturn is the outward-looking face. But the inward-looking face is Saturn is saying, know yourself, know what's going on in there, because that's really what's going to affect what you see to be happening outside. So Saturn, I was kind of redeeming Saturn in is it my eyes or his, as to him not being just this stern, materialistic version of him. Because it's like the sign it rules, you know, Capricorn is actually originally in Babylonian astrology is the goat fish, the sea goat, with a mystical fishy tail. And so Saturn is similar, it has that side to it. And call me subjective, because of having Saturn in Cancer in the 12th house, it's pretty watery in there. But that took some getting a hang of, I tell you. I always used to liken that to trying to build sandcastles underwater. But it's also where the poetry comes in, because I mean, the 12th house for your listeners. How would you describe the 12th house?
How do you describe the 12th house? Numinous, mystical. I think for me, it's the return to one.
The source, yeah.
It's the return to source, absolutely. And it's the reason we struggle with it is because we're not entirely comfortable returning to source, because it means relinquishing something. And what we're relinquishing is ourselves. And we're not that keen on doing that on the whole.
Tell that to Saturn in the 12th house, yeah. Because that's been my struggle. And it still is to a degree. I'm still, because my ego, my mind ego still wants to find a kind of ABC sequential way of getting back to the source. And that's not how it works, I don't think. As you said, the word numinous, it's far more numinous. Yeah. Do you use the Sabian symbols at all in your work?
Well, see, I think that's another conversation. And I did had another book out on the Sabian symbols. And I thought it might be nice to have you back to talk just about that.
Sure. Yeah, I love the Sabian symbols. So you're talking about my book on the Sabian symbols. Which one?
I haven't, I've just noticed that you've got it. So that's a pleasure yet to come.
Yes, it's. I'm very upset about that book because it should have been far more successful. But it's all part of my Saturn in the 12th house lesson about not, I don't speak to the marketplace very well, to be honest with you.
Well, I think many of us have that struggle.
I think it just goes with the territory rather. Yeah.
It does. So, well, I think talking about the 12th house and all things numinous, etc., it's very interesting because the conversation we have had actually sums up your book beautifully. You begin with some keywords and it expands into something else altogether, something more full and more round. And for that, Lyn, I thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you and your Pluto in the first house. It's a treat to interface with someone who's got the same intense persona as me. But your Taurus sun holds it better in a way than my moon, my sun in Virgo. I was talking before we started to a friend about fixed planets and mutable and cardinal, what they meant. And it's a good example of your fixity versus my mutability. Because Pluto plays havoc with my mutability. I can feel like I'm everything and nothing within a space of a minute.
Ah, that's interesting.
Whereas
I would have thought that given that it's in a fixed sign, and is your ascendant in Leo as well?
As well as you?
No, is
No,
your,
I was going to say you look a lot younger than that.
Leo with Pluto?
Yes, it's Pluto and Leo in the first house. Yeah.
I would have thought that that would have given you enough fixity to deal with Pluto, but it turns out you don't. On the other hand,
I have no other planets or anything in the fixed signs. It's asking a lot of that particular part of my chart. As Pluto's a fixed planet because it rules Scorpio. And yeah, but it's like the benefit of being mutable is that I'm open to all sorts of ideas, and it makes me very creative. I explore.
Sure.
I don't hang around. I'm not tempting fate here. I'm not the kind of person to die of cancer. I just don't hold on to stuff.
Well, that's more food for thought there, Lyn.
I'm good at that. Yeah. Very good at that.
Thank you once again. And I will be putting a link to the book in the description box. If people wanted to find you and your website, how do they do that?
Well, it's Lyn Birkbek. That's LynBirkbeck.com.
I will be putting a link to that also in the description box. Thank you once again.
Lovely to meet you.
And thank you all for watching. And next time we're going to be, I guess, thinking a little bit about Christmas. It's looking at 12 Holy Nights with Melanie Reinhardt. Until then, goodbye.